The young and the restless, hidden face of the killer, the shadows that once whispered from the alleys of Genoa City had now crept silently into the golden streets of Nice. Damian had vanished not out of guilt, but out of the sheer necessity to stay alive. His disappearance wasn't cowardice, it was survival. The weight he carried wasn't only that of the bloody memory of the night that changed everything, but of a truth so sharp, so dangerous, that even speaking it aloud would mark him for death. Damian had seen the killer. He knew the face behind the mask, the eyes behind the shadows. And that made him a threat too large to remain breathing. Back in Genoa City and across the European coastlines where whispers ran faster than trains, Nick was slowly being devoured by the judgment of a town that once celebrated his loyalty. The very idea that he could have plunged a dagger into Damian's back spread like venom through every corner. The twisted irony was that while the public thirsted for someone to blame and had thrown Nick into the flames, the true killer walked freely among them, unbothered, invisible in plain sight. The fury that burned in Lily's chest was not merely because of what had happened to Damian, but because of the dangerous ignorance that now threatened everyone. She alone knew the location where Damian was hiding, alone knew that the man accused, Nick, was innocent, and that somewhere, the real killer was watching closely, waiting for a second chance to silence the only person who could expose him. Lily's silence was both an act of protection and complicity. She had begged Damian to stay hidden, had sworn to shield his location, even from those she once trusted with her life. Chance was one of them. But now, even Chance had become a name she whispered with caution. Ever since arriving in Nice, his behavior had been unnerving, too informed, too aware, too present. He always seemed to be just one step ahead of the facts, as if he wasn't uncovering them but orchestrating them. Lily could feel her hands tremble every time she remembered the way his eyes had narrowed at her when she'd refused to reveal what she knew. He had smiled, too calm, too knowing. Something in her gut told her Chance wasn't just hunting the truth, he might be hunting Damian himself. Damian, hiding in a modest villa tucked beneath olive trees outside Marseille, counted every hour like a man on borrowed time. He kept his phone off, communicated only through cryptic handwritten notes passed through a former associate from his espionage days, someone who owed him a life. He hadn't slept properly in weeks. Each time he shut his eyes, he saw the killer's face, those eyes, that last second before the dagger was thrust into the wrong man's back. Damian had been the target. The bourbon had been drugged, the positioning calculated. But in a twist of fate, someone else had fallen. And that someone's blood had now become the blanket of protection allowing the true monster to roam. Meanwhile, back in Nice, Nick sat under house arrest, growing increasingly unhinged. He knew someone was framing him, but with the town's hatred growing, his voice was a whisper drowned by suspicion. Phyllis, ever unpredictable, had turned cold. Sharon had visited once, eyes full of doubt and pity. Even Victoria had distanced herself. And as the Newman empire slowly began to crumble under the weight of scandal, the real danger grew bolder. The killer knew Damian was alive. That much was certain. But how? Had someone talked? Had Chance found a way to trace Lily's movements? Had he planted something on her, a listening device, a tracker? Lily had grown increasingly paranoid, checking her phone every hour, scanning her car for anything foreign. But Chance was meticulous. He was trained. And if he was truly the man behind the mask, or if he was working for the man behind the mask, then Lily's secrecy was no longer protection. It was bait. Damian, desperate, wrote a final letter to Lily. It wasn't a goodbye, it was a warning. He told her the killer had a scar above his right brow, the remnants of a fire long ago. That detail, insignificant to many, could expose everything. Only a few men in their circle had that scar. One of them was someone Lily had just had coffee with a few days ago. One of them had shaken Chance's hand. One of them had dinner with Sharon. As Lily stared at the letter, the ink smudged slightly by Damian's trembling hands, she felt her breath freeze in her throat. She had seen that scar. Recently. On someone she never imagined could be involved. Her heart pounded as names tumbled through her mind. Carter? Billy? Holden Novak? Or could it be someone even closer? Someone like Chance himself, whose past was locked behind military records no one could access. The clock was ticking. Every hour that passed meant another hour the killer could find Damian, another chance Nick could be destroyed, another moment Lily could be silenced. She had to choose, keep the secret and pray Damian found a way to survive, or tell someone, risk everything, and possibly expose a traitor within the police force. But someone else was already moving in the shadows. A hooded figure had arrived in Marseille. They didn't ask questions. They didn't speak. But they had a photo. Damian's photo. Folded, crumpled, stained with time. And behind that photo, a note: he saw too much. And as the sun began to rise over the French hills, one truth became clear. Damian was running out of time. And Lily, she might be next. No one would dare suspect Chance. He was the steady one, the law, the enforcer of truth and protector of justice in a world where deception ran deep. But that was a mistake, a fatal one. The man who now bore the badge in Nice was not the same man who once walked the halls of Genoa City's police department with quiet conviction. Something had shifted in him, slowly, insidiously, since the day Summer had left. Her departure had done more than just break his heart. It had hollowed him out, left him raw, exposed, and burning with a quiet rage that no one saw coming. Chance had lost his tether to humanity. With Summer gone, with the world around him laughing behind his back, doubting his worth, questioning his instincts, something inside him had snapped. He no longer believed in justice. He no longer believed in people. What was once a compass had become a weapon. He looked around and saw nothing but hypocrisy, power games, and betrayal, and rather than try to fix it, he simply detached. The facade remained, the quiet nods, the gentle voice, the investigative persistence, but underneath it all was a man with no more patience for lies, and no more loyalty to truth. Because truth, as he had learned, meant nothing when the system picked favorites. The rich were always protected. The sinners always escaped. And the so-called heroes were always the most dangerous. And perhaps most shocking of all, buried beneath the layers of distrust, was a secret even darker, a potential alliance no one would dare whisper. Chance and Cain. The idea sounded absurd on its surface. They were too different, too prideful, too morally opposed. But dig deeper, and the cracks began to appear. Both men had been humiliated. Both had watched the people they loved drift away. Both had seen their reputations stained by whispers and rumors. And both had a reason to want control. Not revenge, something bigger. Order. But on their own terms. There were sightings. Once, late at night in the hills outside Genoa City, a car registered to Chance had been seen idling near one of Cain's warehouses, a location known for its lack of surveillance. Another time, a text message intended for an anonymous tip line had been intercepted and traced back to a burner phone activated just hours after Cain had returned from Europe. And then there was the photograph, taken weeks before Damian's stabbing, showing Chance and Cain seated on opposite sides of a dimly lit cafe in Prague. It had been brushed off at the time. A coincidence, a misunderstanding. But now? Now it looked like the beginning of something far more sinister. If they were working together, the implications were catastrophic. Cain, ever the schemer, could have orchestrated the framing of Nick, used Chance's access to evidence, planted false leads, erased footage, twisted the timeline just enough to make Nick look guilty. And Chance, angry, disillusioned, seeking control, might have seen this as poetic justice. A chance to finally make the world bend to a vision where power came from clarity, not chaos. And what if Damian had been collateral damage? Or worse, what if Damian had discovered the alliance? That would explain the desperation. The second stabbing attempt. The silence. The obsession with erasing him completely. Damian had always been a shadow figure, tied to intelligence, secrets, and surveillance. If he had uncovered the truth, if he had even an inkling of what was happening, then his death wasn't a threat. It was a requirement. A necessity. And Lily, in protecting him, had unknowingly stepped into the path of something larger than a simple vendetta. She had inserted herself between two men who no longer played by the rules. But none of this had reached the surface. Not yet. On paper, Chance was still the honorable detective, the voice of reason amid a rising storm. No one dared question his methods. No one traced the unexplained gaps in his reports, the way he always seemed to be just behind the real killer, the way suspects kept slipping through his fingers. Because deep down, everyone wanted to believe he was the last honest man in the game. And that blind faith? It might be the very thing that allows the real killer to remain free. Lily, meanwhile, began to sense the scope of what she had stumbled into. Her conversations with Chance became colder, more strategic. She no longer gave answers, she asked questions. And she began to notice things. The way he would pivot when certain names were mentioned. The way his smile lingered too long when Kane's name came up. The way he never asked about Damian directly, but always tried to steer the topic toward locations, movements, and escape plans. It wasn't just curiosity. It was pursuit. She began to make copies of Damian's letters. She stored one in her lawyer's office, another inside a music box at her daughter's school, and one more behind a false panel in her car's dashboard. If anything happened to her, the truth would not die with her. And yet, the more she prepared, the more alone she felt. Because the walls were closing in, and she could no longer be sure who was watching, or how far they'd go to silence her. Somewhere, in the quiet woods north of Marseille, Damian sensed the pressure too. He was trying to decide whether to run again, to abandon Lily's protection and disappear for good. But he knew he couldn't. Because if he ran, the killer would never be exposed. And if he stayed, he would die. Unless someone took a risk. Unless someone like Lily, brave enough, angry enough, scared enough, was willing to expose it all, even if it meant going against someone like Chance. But Lily wasn't alone. A new player had entered the story. Someone with ties to both Kane and Chance. Someone who knew about the cafe in Prague. Someone with access to security footage no one thought still existed. And this person, still unnamed, operating under the alias Vesper, had just sent Lily a message: "You're right not to trust him. But don't trust Kane either. I'll send proof." The file attached was encrypted, password protected with a phrase only Lily would recognize, a lyric from a song her mother used to sing. She hadn't heard it in decades. The moment she opened it, she saw the raw footage, a shaky, time-stamped clip showing Chance walking into the warehouse, alone, hours before the night Damian vanished. And even more damning, Kane arriving shortly after, carrying a small leather case and a knife.